The streets of Las Vegas never really sleep. Neon lights flickered against the black sky, painting the sidewalks in restless colors: red, green, gold. The sound of music and slot machines spilled out from the casino doors, mixing with laughter, shouting, and the endless shuffle of footsteps. For most people, it was just another night in the city that fed on excitement. But for one man walking alone down the strip, this night was about to turn into something far more dangerous. He wasn't dressed like the flashy tourists or the slick gamblers. His clothes were plain, his walk steady. He carried himself like someone who wanted no attention. Yet his eyes scanned everything: the glowing signs, the crowded sidewalks, the alleys hidden between casinos. Years of living carefully had made him this way. He wasn't there to gamble or chase thrills. He had finished a long day of work and was simply heading back to his quiet hotel on the edge of town. But just as he passed a narrow side street, something made him stop. At first, it was only a sound, a muffled cry. His steps froze, and he turned his head slowly toward the alley. In the dim light, he caught sight of movement: a young woman struggling as two large men forced her deeper into the shadows. Her eyes wide, her mouth covered, her hands clawing helplessly at the air. The man's chest tightened. He didn't know her, but in that instant, her fear was enough to pull him forward. He glanced back toward the busy street where people hurried by, too distracted to notice what was happening. No one would help her. No one except him. He stepped into the alley, his voice low but firm. "Let her go." The two men turned their heads. They weren't surprised. It was almost as if they were expecting someone to interrupt. They exchanged a look, then one of them smirked. Their suits were sharp, their watches gleamed, but their eyes carried the coldness of men used to doing ugly work. "This isn't your business," one of them said, his voice calm but heavy with threat. The man didn't move back. "It is now." The woman tried to pull free, but the second man's grip tightened on her arm. The smirk on his face grew wider as he looked at the stranger who dared to step closer. "You should walk away. Last chance." Before the stranger could answer, another voice drifted through the alley. Smooth, deliberate, and chillingly confident. Now, what do we have here?" From the shadows at the far end of the alley, a figure emerged. He wasn't as large as the two men holding the woman, but the air around him felt heavier. His tailored suit shone under the dim streetlight, his steps slow and measured, like a man who owned not just the alley, but half the city around it. Rings glimmered on his fingers as he adjusted his cufflinks, his smile calm but dangerous. The two men immediately straightened, their smirks fading into respectful silence. The woman froze, her eyes darting from her captors to the man now approaching. The stranger recognized him instantly. Anyone who spent enough time in Vegas knew the stories, even if they wished they didn't. He was a crime boss who thrived on wagers, not the kind you played at slot machines, but deadly bets made in the hidden corners of the city. His reputation was built not only on money and power, but on the terrifying way he turned everything into a game of chance. The boss's eyes locked onto the stranger. "You've got nerve," he said softly, almost as if he admired it. Most men would have kept walking, but not you. The stranger didn't flinch. He kept his eyes steady, his breathing even. "Let her go," he repeated. The boss chuckled, a low sound that echoed off the brick walls. "You think you can give orders in my city? No, my friend. That's not how this works." "You see," he stepped closer, his gaze sharp, his voice dropping to a whisper that still carried through the alley. "Everything here is a wager. Life, freedom, even fate itself." The woman whimpered, her eyes begging the stranger not to give up. The two enforcers waited silently, their hands gripping her arms tighter. The boss smiled, tilting his head. "I'll make you an offer. Simple. Win against me, and she walks free. Lose, and you both belong to me." The words hung heavy in the air. The stranger's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. He hadn't come looking for a fight, but now the choice stood before him, clear as the neon glow spilling from the street. He could walk away and leave her to her fate, or he could step into a deadly game with a man who owned the city's shadows. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady when he answered. "What's the wager?" The boss's smile widened. "Ah, now we begin." The alley grew quieter, though the city outside was still alive with its flashing lights and music. Inside that narrow space, it felt like the world had shifted. The boss stood calmly, his eyes studying the man as if measuring him, while his two enforcers kept their hold on the frightened woman. The stranger didn't move, but inside, his thoughts were racing. He could feel the danger of the moment pressing down on him, but there was no way he could walk away. The woman's terrified eyes made that choice for him. The boss slipped his hands into his pockets and tilted his head. "You want to know the wager? Good. That means you're not as foolish as you look. But let me be clear, this is not a game of cards, not dice, not roulette. No, this wager is simpler and far more interesting." He took a slow step forward, his polished shoes echoing against the pavement. "You fight me. No weapons, no tricks. One-on-one. If you win, she's free. If you lose," his voice trailed off, but his smile said more than his words ever could. The woman shook her head, whispering, "Please don't," her voice breaking with fear. She didn't want this stranger, this man she didn't even know, to risk himself for her. But his eyes never left the boss. "Agreed," the stranger said firmly. The boss raised his eyebrows in mild surprise, then laughed softly, a sound that was both amused and unsettling. "So quick to answer. You're either very brave or very foolish." He turned his head slightly, and one of his men stepped forward, dragging the woman a few paces back. She resisted, but the grip on her arm was too strong. Word traveled fast in Vegas, even faster in the Underworld. Within minutes, people began drifting toward the alley. A group of gamblers leaving a casino slowed, curious about the unusual tension they felt in the air. A pair of off-duty dealers followed the sound of whispers. Soon, a small crowd gathered at the edge of the alley, their faces glowing under the neon spill from a street. "What's going on?" someone muttered. "Boss is making another wager," another whispered back. This time with some nobody. Phones stayed tucked away. No one dared film. Everyone knew that when the crime boss staged his games, recording them was as dangerous as joining them. Instead, they watched wide-eyed, as the stranger squared himself against the man who ruled Vegas's shadows. The boss loosened his tie and slipped off his jacket, folding it neatly and handing it to one of his men. His movements were precise, practiced, as if even in violence he demanded order. His smile remained calm, but his eyes gleamed with a predator's hunger. "You still have a chance to walk away," he said, almost kindly. "Leave now, and I might let you go with just a warning. But if you stay, there's no turning back." The stranger inhaled slowly, steadying himself. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing into his bones. But deep inside, there was something else too, something that had been quiet for years but never truly gone. Discipline, training, a strength built not for show, but for survival. "I'm not walking away," he answered. The crowd murmured, their whispers filled with disbelief and curiosity. No one had spoken to the boss like that in years. The woman's voice broke again, soft and desperate. "Don't do this." But the stranger didn't look at her. He couldn't. If he allowed her fear to weaken him now, he would already be defeated. The boss stretched his arms casually, his smile never fading. "Good. Very good. I like your spirit. Then let us make it interesting." He raised his voice, addressing the gathering crowd. "Tonight, in the heart of this city, we have a wager. If he beats me, the girl walks free. If he loses," he paused, letting silence fill the alley, "they both belong to me." The words sent a shiver through the onlookers. Some gasped, some cheered, others shook their heads. But no one left. They wanted to see how this would unfold. The boss stepped into the center of the alley, his stance relaxed, almost casual. But the stranger could see it, the way his shoulders were set, the slight bend in his knees. This man wasn't just a crime boss. He had fought before, many times, and he enjoyed it. The stranger slowly moved forward, his heart pounding, but his expression calm. He wasn't here for glory or for thrill. He was here because walking away meant condemning an innocent woman. The alley, once just another shadowy cut through the city, now felt like an arena. Neon spilled across the cracked pavement, broken glass glimmered like stars at their feet, and the air buzzed with tension. The woman stood frozen in the grip of the enforcers, her breath quick and shallow. She prayed silently for the stranger she had never met, for the man who had chosen to risk everything for her freedom. The boss's smile deepened as he raised his hands. "Let's begin." And with that, the wager was set. The alley seemed to shrink as the two men faced each other. The noise of a Las Vegas strip faded into the background, replaced by the thrum of heartbeats and the low murmurs of a gathering crowd. Neon lights from the casino signs cast long shadows, stretching across the cracked pavement like warning lines drawn by fate itself. The crime boss loosened his shoulders with the ease of a man who had done this many times before. His eyes gleamed, calm yet dangerous, the look of someone who enjoyed testing how much pain others could endure. He raised his hands, not in haste, but in a measured stance that told everyone he was in control. The stranger stood opposite him, silent, steady. He didn't look like a fighter. His plain clothes, his quiet demeanor, none of it suggested he belonged in a contest like this. But there was something unshakable in his posture. His fists curled slowly, his breath controlled, as though he was reaching deep into a part of himself he hadn't called upon in years. The boss smirked. "Last chance," he said, his voice carrying through the alley. "Walk away before I break you." The stranger said nothing. He simply stepped forward, eyes locked, unflinching. The boss chuckled, then moved with sudden speed. His fist cut through the air, aiming for the stranger's jaw. The crowd gasped as the stranger ducked, the punch grazing past his ear. In that single move, whispers rippled through the onlookers. He wasn't just some ordinary man. His movements were sharp, practiced. The boss stepped back, tilting his head as though re-evaluating his opponent. "Interesting," he murmured, before charging again. This time, his punch connected. The stranger's head snapped to the side, pain flashing across his face as he staggered. The woman cried out softly, her voice cracking, but the stranger didn't fall. He steadied himself, wiped the blood from his lip, and stood taller than before. The crowd erupted in cheers and jeers. Some shouted for the boss, others began to root for the underdog. It had become more than a fight. It was a spectacle, a wager not just for freedom, but for pride. The boss pressed forward, striking with brutal strength. His fists hammered against the stranger's ribs. His shoulder slammed into his chest. Each blow echoed in the narrow alley, bouncing off the brick walls. The stranger grunted, his body absorbing the punishment, but his eyes remained fixed. Every strike reminded him of why he was there, not for himself, but for the terrified woman watching from the sidelines. Then, with a sudden burst of resolve, he countered. A quick jab to the boss's midsection, sharp and precise. The boss stumbled a half step, his smirk faltering for the first time. The crowd roared, shocked to see someone actually land a hit on the man they all feared. The boss's expression darkened. No more smirks. No more calm. His movements grew faster, harsher. He swung with fury, each punch carrying more weight. The stranger blocked what he could, but some strikes slipped through, battering his body and forcing him back against the wall. His breath came harder now, sweat mixing with blood, but still he didn't go down. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she struggled against the enforcer's grip. "Please stop," she cried, her voice raw. But the men holding her didn't flinch. To them, this was just another night, another wager in a city that thrived on cruelty. The stranger closed his eyes for a brief moment, centering himself. Pain throbbed through his chest, his arms ached, but deep inside, he found something stronger than the pain. He remembered nights of training long ago, moments when quitting wasn't an option, when pushing past limits meant survival. The boss swung again, but this time the stranger met his fist with a block, redirecting the blow. In one fluid motion, he countered with a strike to the boss's ribs. The impact forced a grunt from the man who was never supposed to stumble. Gasps filled the alley. The stranger pressed forward now, each move deliberate. He wasn't faster, he wasn't stronger, but he was resilient. Every time the boss struck him down, he rose back up, refusing to surrender. The crowd shifted, their cheers growing louder, rooting for the man who had walked into the alley as nobody and now stood toe-to-toe with Vegas's most feared figure. The boss stepped back, breathing heavier than before. His eyes narrowed, studying his opponent. "You're full of surprises," he said, his tone less amused, more serious. The stranger didn't respond. He raised his fists again, steady as stone. For a brief moment, silence fell over the alley. The crowd leaned in, waiting. The woman's breath caught in her throat. Two men stood in the center of it all, one a king of the underground, the other a quiet stranger with nothing to lose except his word. Then the fight resumed. Fists flew, sweat sprayed, and the sound of knuckles meeting flesh echoed like drumbeats of war. And though the stranger's body screamed with pain, his heart carried only one thought: she must walk free. The crowd pressed closer now, their whispers a low hum that filled the night. The alley had become a stage, and everyone's eyes were fixed on the two men battling under the neon glow. The boss, once confident and composed, was no longer fighting with the ease of a man who always won. His breaths came faster, his strikes harder but less controlled. The stranger, though bruised and bleeding, stood firm, each second on his feet, defying the odds. The boss launched another heavy swing. The stranger blocked, his forearm aching from the impact, but he didn't let the pain slow him down. He shifted his weight, ducked under the next punch, and with a sharp twist, drove his elbow into the boss's ribs. The sound of the impact carried through the alley. The boss staggered back, his face tightening as he realized he had been caught off guard. The crowd gasped, then erupted into cheers. For the first time in years, they saw the man who ruled Vegas's shadows stumble. Whispers rippled through them like sparks catching fire. "Did you see that? He landed it. He might actually stand a chance." The enforcers holding the woman exchanged uneasy looks. She, too, stared wide-eyed, her fear mixing with a fragile spark of hope. The boss straightened, his jaw clenched, his smirk gone. His eyes darkened as he wiped blood from the corner of his mouth. "You're better than you look," he admitted, his voice low but edged with anger. "But don't fool yourself. You can't win." The stranger said nothing. His silence wasn't weakness, it was power. He didn't need threats or boasts. His defiance was written in the way he stood, steady and unshaken, ready for whatever came next. The boss attacked again, this time with a flurry of blows meant to overwhelm. His fists hammered forward, one after the other, forcing the stranger to block, sidestep, absorb the punishment. But the stranger had learned his rhythm now. He could feel the cracks in the boss's control. And then, in a moment of instinct, he struck back. A jab to the stomach, a hook across the jaw, a final shove that sent the boss stumbling against the wall. The alley fell silent for a heartbeat. The crime boss, Vegas's untouchable king, was pinned back, his body hunched, his breath ragged. The crowd roared, louder than before. Some laughed, others shouted encouragement, but all of them knew what they were witnessing was rare. The fall of a man who had never been challenged. The boss pushed off the wall, fury in his eyes. "You think this means anything?" he hissed, straightening his suit as if to regain control. "You land a few punches, and suddenly you believe you're a hero?" The stranger's voice was quiet but clear. "I don't need to be a hero. I just need to keep my word." The simplicity of the words struck deeper than any blow. The woman's eyes filled with tears. The crowd grew restless, sensing the shift in power. The boss sneered, but there was unease beneath his mask. For years, his wagers had ended the same way. He always won. His enemies always broke. But this man, this stranger, refused to fall. And worse, he fought not for himself, but for someone else. That kind of resolve was harder to crush. The boss paced in a small circle, trying to recover his composure. Then he raised his voice, loud enough for all to hear. "Let's make this more interesting." He pointed at the stranger, his tone mocking yet strained. "Walk away now, and I'll let you live. But if you stay, I'll double the wager. Not just her freedom, but your life. Win, and you both walk free. Lose, and neither of you sees daylight again." The crowd gasped. The risk had doubled. The danger had sharpened. The woman shook her head, her voice breaking. "Don't do it, please." But the stranger lifted his chin, his eyes steady. "I'm not walking away." The alley buzzed with tension. The boss clenched his fists, his composure cracking further. His calm, calculated game was slipping away, replaced by frustration. He lunged again, this time recklessly, swinging with pure anger. The stranger sidestepped, his instincts sharp, and struck with precision. His fist connected with the boss's chest, driving the air out of him. Another hit followed, this one across the jaw, snapping his head to the side. The crowd erupted, their cheers bouncing off the brick walls like thunder. The boss stumbled, his balance faltering. For the first time, he looked less like a king and more like a man who could bleed, who could lose. The stranger stood tall, battered but unbroken. His silence, his calm, his resilience, they cut deeper into the boss than any punch. The enforcers tightened their grip on the woman, their expressions unsettled. She, however, could only stare, her heart pounding. The impossible was happening right before her eyes. The crowd chanted now, their voices rising in waves. "Finish it! Finish it!" The stranger's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his body aching, but his eyes never left the boss. He hadn't come for cheers. He hadn't come for wagers. He came for one reason, to make sure the woman walked free. And the boss, humiliated but still standing, realized something he had never felt before: fear. The alley was alive with noise now. The crowd that had gathered was no longer silent or cautious. They were shouting, clapping, and leaning forward, desperate to see how it would end. Some called for the boss to rise again. Others cheered for the quiet stranger who had somehow endured the impossible. The neon lights above flickered against their faces, painting them in red and gold as if the city itself wanted to witness this moment. The boss wiped blood from his lip, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. He had never been pushed this far in his own game, never been forced to stumble in front of an audience that feared and respected him. His pride was wounded deeper than his body, and the weight of humiliation pressed harder than the stranger's fists. The stranger stood a few feet away, his arms heavy, his ribs sore, his knuckles raw. Every breath burned, but his resolve burned brighter. He didn't flinch, didn't retreat. He had only one thought running through him, like fire. She must walk free. The boss stepped forward again, slower this time, each move measured. His voice dropped to a growl. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I've ended men tougher than you. Do you really think you'll be the first to walk away?" The stranger's eyes didn't waver. "I don't care who you are. Tonight you lose." The crowd erupted again at the defiance. The woman, still held by the enforcers, felt tears spill down her cheeks. She had never met this man before tonight, yet here he was, risking his life for hers. The boss roared and charged, his fist swinging with fury. He threw everything he had left into each blow, desperate to crush the defiance standing before him. The stranger absorbed the storm, blocking, sidestepping, feeling the weight of each strike crash against him. His arms screamed in pain, but his mind stayed calm, searching for the opening he knew would come. And then it did. The boss swung wide, his fist slicing through empty air as the stranger ducked under it. In that heartbeat, the world seemed to slow. The stranger's body moved on instinct, his muscles remembering what his mind had trained long ago. He drove forward, his fist slamming into the boss's ribs with a force that rattled through bone. The boss grunted, his body folding slightly, and before he could recover, the stranger delivered the final blow, a powerful strike across the jaw. The sound cracked through the alley like a thunderclap. The boss stumbled, his legs buckling beneath him. The crowd gasped, then fell silent as he crumpled to the pavement. For the first time, Vegas's crime boss lay defeated, his body sprawled across the ground, his pride shattered. The silence lingered for a long moment, heavy and unreal. Then the alley erupted in noise, cheers, shouts, the disbelief of people who had just seen the unthinkable. The stranger stood over the fallen boss, his chest heaving, sweat and blood dripping from his face. He didn't raise his fists in triumph. He didn't shout or smile. He simply stood there, steady and silent, his eyes locked on the woman. The boss groaned, trying to push himself up, but his strength failed him. He looked up at the stranger with hatred burning in his eyes, but even he knew the rules of his own wager. His voice cracked as he spat the words. "She goes free." The enforcers hesitated, glancing at one another. They had never seen their leader in this position before. For a moment, they seemed unsure if they should obey. But the look in the boss's eyes told them everything. Slowly, reluctantly, they released the woman. She stumbled forward, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. The stranger reached out and steadied her, his grip gentle despite the blood covering his knuckles. "You're safe now," he whispered. The crowd continued to buzz, but their voices blurred into background noise. For the woman, the world had narrowed to this one man, the stranger who had walked into her nightmare and turned it into freedom. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "You didn't even know me." The stranger held her gaze, his eyes tired but steady. "Because someone had to." She wanted to say more, to thank him, to ask who he really was, but before she could, he turned away. He didn't stay for cheers, didn't wait for recognition. He walked toward the end of the alley, each step slow but purposeful, disappearing back into the neon night like a shadow fading from a stage. The crowd parted as he passed, their whispers following him. Who was he? No one knows. Just a man who stood up. The woman watched him go, her heart full of gratitude and wonder. She would never forget his face, his silence, his strength. In a city ruled by greed and power, she had witnessed something different, something rare. And though the crime boss still lay on the ground, humiliated and broken, one truth had been written into the night. Sometimes courage doesn't come from those with power, but from those who choose to fight when no one else will. The wager was over, and against all odds, the stranger had won.